Welcome, everybody. As we just were presented, we are Uffe, who will say a word or two about himself.
Yeah. I start. Okay, I've been a lead developer in Microsoft for some years. I've been working on the Acceptor client, the user interface for that, and then transitioned into NAV and worked on the RTC client there as a lead developer. And the last 3 years I've been a lead developer in the server part of NAV.
Yeah, and I'm Bartel Knudsen. I am an application developer, so I use the stuff that Uffe and his team delivers. And I've been with Navision for a long time, since '97, and worked on all releases from 2.0 until now. And today we're going to look at mainly some things that Uffe and his team has made, and of course also how we application developers use it. I mean, I'm one of you in this respect. So, yeah, this is just the abstract that you have read. So this is what we're going through. Short, brief look at history. If you have attended previous sessions, you have probably seen it before, so I'll go quickly through it. And then a list of things of what does this mean to me. So this is a repeat of something you've seen before. So we are going from the old 2-tier over our intermediate 3-tier in 2009, and now in NAV 7 or now 2013 we have this clean 3-tier. And just to point out for some things we're going to look at later is, first of all, I need to use the correct buttons here. So one element is the NAS session we're going to take a look at. Then you can see we have the client sessions, but a client session can start a background session, and a NAS session can start a background session, and a background session can start a background session. That's mainly what this slide is about. So I think I'm ready to hand over to Uffe.
So I will start up with talking a bit about server going 64-bit and some of the reasons for that. And one of the obvious reasons are that it's a server product, and server products are 64-bit. It's not like some people might have a perception that it's about performance, because it's not. It's actually about addressing more memory and bigger files and having more process on a single machine. So it's that the space you can address, the files you can access, and so on. And this move to 64-bit has actually done some bad things and some good things. And one of the good things is that we have support for server-side printing. I will come with a slide on that later. Because of this, server usually are more equipped memory and disk. Some of the big, huge report may run better on the server side. And there's different ways you can do it. You can actually do it yourself in a background session, which we will not cover how to do a report in background session, but talk about background session later. You can also run them in NAS, which I just told is equal to a background session, a special background session perhaps, or you can use a job queue. Now, some of the things that can maybe a bit tricky is the printer selection part of it. And I won't go into detail on that, because if you want to know about that, you should actually have been in the other room where they are talking about reports right now. So this is just to mention that this is one of the advantages you get. As you have to remember some stuff when you do it. If your service instance has to run with a domain user, because that's the printer it will use, you can track if it's done using this session event table. You've probably seen it a couple of times. And then the downside of it is that you need to make sure that the printer driver is not showing any UI, because that will currently block the server session. And you have to get somebody to the server room and press OK or enter the file name or whatever it is the printer driver is requesting. So that's a limitation right now, that you have to make sure that that doesn't happen. If we then move into some of the bad stuff, is that we are removing cfront. It's discontinued from now 2013, and we know that it might not have a fully coverage in the suggestion we have for replacing it, but there is some way of getting the things you could with cfront, and that is using web services to execute functionality. You can use OData to query data, and OData is actually really fast if you have really big data sets you want to read. It's slightly slower if you have small data sets. If around 1,000 rows, it kind of compares to cfront, if I remember correctly. Then we have added some C-side command line options so you can import text FOB files and compile. Yeah, we can take questions, yeah?
I got the impression that you also had an option for calling sign mode on the object.
So the question was that we had an option of calling the sign mode on objects, not that I know of.
But that is correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I will actually continue with some, in my view, it's not bad actually. I think it's a good news that we do not support COM on the server. But I think from your perspective, it might be some of the less good news. We have de-supported COM server-side completely. And the reason for that is that we cannot load 32-bit things in. There's a lot of security issues with COM components, and there's a lot of registrations issues as well. And since we have .NET Interop, which is giving the same functionality, we actually urge you to rewrite your components that you had in COM to be new .NET objects.
Or
yeah.
even better, because as you know, now in NAV you can do more or less native .NET development. I mean, you can use .NET types, so many of the things you used to do COM components for earlier, you don't need to. Just write a code unit and access the standard .NET library from there.
Yeah.
So, of course, it doesn't solve everything, but in many ways, that's all. You can do almost anything there.
That is correctly. There is, however, a way, and it's not an easy way, and it's not I would actually say it's an ugly way. If you have a 32-bit really legacy code component, you shouldn't, if you don't have the source code or whatever, there is two ways you can get by that. And that is by getting the operating system to host this in a process outside of the server. And I won't show it because it's really nerdy. It does not require that you write the component, rewrite that one. It requires that you rewrite a .NET wrapper or component that uses your COM component. The COM component, then you can host that in something called DLL surrogate. That is, you set some extra registry keys on the COM component, which will make the OS hosted in a separate process. Or you can host it yourself in a COM+ environment. You just need to remember to host it in the 32-bit version of COM+. Then when you use the .NET component you wrote, that will go with RTC or DCOM to the old COM component you had. There's some things to consider if you do that. That is that since you're using a remote procedure call, it may not perform the same way if you have something you call really often. There may be things that is not supported easily. Events is one of them. And I think we have so many good things with .NET in top, both as Bartek said, using it from AL or writing components and using that. So I would rather have the people go rewrite things. And then in the end, I haven't put it on the slides because I don't want to write it down, but there's the last escape, and that is to set the component to run on the client. But the client still supports COM and 32-bit, and then you have to go and install it on the clients, and it will run even slower if you did the out-of-process hosting. So it's the last resort, I would say. And I bet that if you do it, you will find out that it will give more issues than if you rewrote it. The next thing that we have changed, and there's been a session on that as well, it was unfortunately on the first day, it was this running NAV on Azure, where they talked about the new user authentication. And I won't go into details on it, but it has changed the user model and the user table we have in NAV. There's really good things that came out of that, especially that we have removed this impersonation that we had, that when you ran code from a client, it ran under the context of that user, operating security context-wise. So it was actually the user who had privileges to the disk or the directories, or when you wrote a file on the server, you will see it was that user who did it. When we removed impersonation, everything is running on the server under the context of the service account, and that account has to have access to files and directories that you are going to access on the server side. If you then again still need to run something on the context of the user who's logged on with the RTC, you have to make an add-in and run it on the client again. That's the only way to get it. Or you have to get the password and username to the server some way, and then create a context for the user over there. We don't have it anymore. But as a side point on that is that the thing we have seen before is that delegation between servers has been difficult. It's not difficult because you don't need it anymore. There's some help in this code unit 418, where you can see how you look up a user, because before the user ID was always a domain account / username. It's not anymore, depending on the user authentication method you're using. It might just be a string. So there's some help in there on how to look up a user ID. But you just need to be aware of it. It has changed. The next thing I was going to talk about is server administration. And there's some really good news there. There's a new way of configuring and administrating a server. We added a management console snap in that does some basic things, and we added a PowerShell script for doing even more things. We also added that you can have multiple NAV instances on the same machine, and you can set it up easily using the management console or the PowerShell. Both PowerShell and management console will provide simple validation of config values. It will not validate if the user account is valid or the server name for the database is valid and so on, but it will validate that a integer value is within the range, and it will also validate if a text that has a set of outcome is the right outcome. So you get some help there. And the last but really important thing is, since we're using PowerShell, you can do remote administration, so you don't have to be on the server you are trying to set up. You easily use PowerShell or the management console to connect to a remote machine, and then from there administrate the server. While you configure a server. There is some consideration you need to have, is that a server instance can only run one NAS session. The NAS session is special, as I mentioned. It is a background session, but it's treated a bit different, especially with regards to error recovery. I'll come into that later. And it's also recommended that you do not, even though you can, set up a NAS server to have a client connection as well. So the recommendation is that you set up a NAS to only run the NAS session, and that's it. And then if you want to have a RTC connector, you set up an instance that handles the RTC or OData or web services. And yep, I can. It's actually, for some reason I have a slide on later, but the reason for it is the error recovery. The NAS session is set up in that sense that if it meets an error, it can be either a deadlock, or you in your code write error, or any of these things that usually will terminate the execution of AL. The NAS session is set up to reboot the server's instance. So it actually, on purpose, crashes the server, and then Windows Service Recovery will kick in the way you have configured it. You can configure it to restart one or twice or all the time, and send emails and whatever, and then restart the NAS and run your NAS session again. This is, of course, to make it stable. One of the things with the new NAS is that it's far more stable than the old NAS, that it has this automatic reboot, so if it encounters errors, it will get up and running again. That, of course, requires some of the code that you have on the NAS, that it is able to recover or know what to engage in of execution. I know that Bardio will come in on the job queue, which is able to do this for you, which is the thing you need. And the last one I have is this, that the login account that the NAS is set up to use has to be a valid NAV user and valid Windows user, because it logs on like a RTC, a client, and everything that runs on the NAS in that session or the session from that NAS session will run under that user that you set up to run the NAS under. So it's also that NAS user that has to have access to whatever services you are trying to reach outside, or files you have to write, and printers you are trying to use. I was actually going to demo the new management console. Let's see if I can find it. If we take a look at the way you did it before, that you went into the program files, and then there you found the config file.
It was in the top.
Was it in the top?
Custom settings.
Oh. And there you can see this is the way you used to do it. You were forced to go in here and add the different values for the different keywords, and there's a lot of ways you can mess up with this. Make it either a typo error or wrong values. And all that we have made available in the management console, where you, for that machine you have connected to, will see all the instances listed, and you can see all the configuration for an instance. And they also added that there's some categories, so you will see the different things. Then you can go click edit, and now I'm actually setting up something. If I, for instance, do a type error up here, I will get an box saying that this is not a valid entry. You get like in the RTC, the notification that this was wrong, and I can type in the correct value and save it. When you get this notion up that if you change anything, you have to remember to restart the server. That is that the server, if it's running right now, picked up the settings when it started, and I can go around and do all the settings changes I want, and then when I'm done, I can restart the server. Or if it stops, I have to start it myself manually. It will not automatically do it while you are configuring anything. And one thing that's important to show or notice is that you can, for instance, set up a NAS service, and that's fairly easy. You will go in and set up the company it has to run on. It has to be exactly spelled like the company is, with all spaces and dots. You can set up which code unit it has to run, and with method on the code unit if you want. If you don't only specify a code unit, it will run on that code unit. And you can also specify arguments for it. And then there's a special tick in here called Enable Debugging. That is, if you have issues with your NAS startup session, it's hard to debug because it starts when the server starts. When you tick up this one, it will wait 1 minute before it starts the session. So you can switch over to the debugger and start debugging. And Bart will show something about debugging NAS and debugger background session later. But this you have to check in if you want it to debug the startup session you are setting up.
So this option should have been called delayed start.
Yeah. And the same way you can set up if you want to have client services running and OData web service and all the things you set up here.
Yeah. Oh, I want a T-shirt. Why wasn't this called delayed startup?
I don't know, actually.
T-shirt.
A T-shirt for you.
That was just kidding.
Another thing you can do with the management console is that you can easily set up new instances, and that is important if you remember the statement that a NAS service should only run NAS and not have client connection. So you go in and right-click the machine node and then choose Add Session, or Add Instance, and then you have to enter all the port numbers. And I'll choose to run it under the network services. So now I actually defined and set up a instance more. And as you can see, it's not started. Well, I can actually just right-click on it and then start it up. And then I have 2 running services. There it is. So you have the one that came with the installation, and I have the one I just added. So that's super simple. We use it in our own internal way of when we do run our debug and build and unit test and all that we have in our environment. They add and install new instances all the time. And one thing is you can also see you can actually stop it using the normal service interface. Oh. Yeah, and I lost it. Where is my... Yeah. I'll just start up again. Suddenly I clicked remove. I'm sorry. So now I'm removing it. I wanted to show it was stopped, but then I suddenly came into, I removed it. But that's the other thing, you can remove it as easily as you can add them. And then the last thing, which I will not show because I don't have another computer set up, but you can click on the connect and then you connect to the server you have. It's things running. There's some small setup you have to do. You have to be administrator on the machine. You have to enable remote PowerShell. Well, that is a one-time thing you have to do. When that's done, you can do exactly what I did on a different machine. Yeah. Yeah, it does some basic setup, also of firewall ports and so on. If you look into the documentation on the PowerShell scripts, which I'm going to briefly show later, everything we've done the question was if it does set up thing when you add an instance about authentication or bytes. You have, yeah, that was the question, wasn't it? Everything we do in the management console are using the PowerShell script. So you can go explore the PowerShell script and the documentation of the PowerShell script, because there's some good documentation on those. And you can easily guess, I would say, what kind of PowerShell script we used. Because that was the next part I was going to talk about, is that there's 3 categories of PowerShell scripts. Something that does not require the instance to run, and that's the simple one as getting the list of instances. You saw you can show an instance that are not running. You can add and remove instances. You can also get and set and remove configurations for instances. And that's what we actually mostly used in the management console. And the remote administration, the management console, comes with the remote operation you have in PowerShell. That everything you do, you can actually remote it to another computer. So go explore the PowerShell scripts, and you will fastly find out what actually is possible. And the PowerShell script actually is able to do more than we can in the management console, because some of the things that are not in the management console is licensing. You can import and export licensing using the PowerShell script. So you don't have to go for C-side to do it. You can actually just write a script or execute the run command that imports the license file. You can also do connection management, the session list. If you've seen insight from the client, you can see the list of all connections. You can also stop them using PowerShell. And it's all kind of connections. That is the hard time to see perhaps a web service call. You have to be lucky. But background session and RTC clients, those you can see and stop using the connection PowerShell. And then the last one, which is, I would say, in the advanced categories, you can set up now user and now user permissions and roles with the PowerShell as well. There's a really good session from last year on Mibuso, where PowerShell in general and some of it used in NAV was presented by Stefan Omdal. You can go download it on I think it was 2012 Mibuso last year, if you want to know more about PowerShell. I briefly wanted to show the environments. Sorry, the wrong one. There you will see it opens up the one we installed with a list of all the commands you have, and they follow a really simple naming from the PowerShell world. Everything where you get something starts with get. Everything where you do something new starts new. Remove, and set if you set something. So if I want to get a list of running instances, I'll just fire off this one, and you will see that I have one running on my machine. If I want to make a new one, Then you can either specify it all in the command line or be lazy as I am right now and type it in. This is just standard PowerShell if you don't supply the options. And then you actually added a new instance of an NAV server, and you see the list now contains 2. It's the same thing as I did in the management console, and this is what the management console does. And if you want to remove it, just have to spell it correctly again. You can suppress the confirmation if you want, as a standard way of suppressing confirmation in the PowerShell. And then you will see it's gone. And as I said, there's a lot of things you can do with the PowerShell script. So this is the way we see administration of a server going using PowerShell, and hopefully we will add more stuff to our snapping. But you can actually also use PowerShell from within NAV if you want that, to build it in there using .NET Insert. And yeah, that was actually what I wanted to show about PowerShell scripting. Then we go into a more bigger topic, the NAS and background session. As we've mentioned many times, NAS is just a session, a special session. But the one we have had implemented will actually give you a close to one-to-one functionality in the old one. You have the same setup parameters. You have some added functionality by specifying the debug and also the method. And then on top of that, you get the stability of the NST or the NAV server. So it is running as stable with your code as the RTC client if it was running under the RTC client. There's some small things that you need to be aware of. The upgrade seems to be really straightforward. The startups method you can use that straight on. You have to set up a NAS server, but that's fairly simple as well. The NAS session keeps the NAS service alive in that sense that it will run as long as the NAS method you have set up to start up is running. And what I mean with that is that if you do a single code walkthrough in it and it doesn't wait or loop or anything, it will run once. And then you have to restart the server and then it will run one time again. That's why there's usually a special way of doing that. We will show that later.
Yeah. You might actually comment that it's the same as before. I mean, if you... So with the old NAS, we had a special code unit 1 trigger, right? And then you could pass on some parameters. You can do the same here. If you remember the screenshot from before where you saw how to configure the NAS part. So you could configure code unit 1 and then give the parameters you're used to. Then it will work as before. But since code unit 1 usually just use those parameters to start some other code unit up, Uffe and his crew gave us that option directly. I mean, why go through code unit 1 since all you want to do is start code unit, whatever.
Yeah. As you said, you have server-side printing also on the NAS. And one thing is that it runs with the universal time zone, but it can't be set up what time zone it has to run under, but by default it runs under UTC. There's a flag you can test if you see how to figure out you're running under a NAS. Nothing special new there. Then the question was here, what to do with error recovery. And that's one of the tricky things with both background session and NAS as well, is the way they handle errors. Because usually you see a message box if something really go wrong. There you have to go into the event log, and there the message will be logged with as an error. And if you set up your service to recover, and it's set up to do that once every day in the standard installation, you can configure it differently, it will restart. So. Then we are moving into some of the mechanism that makes the new NAS and background session work. And it's been mentioned a couple of times during this year. And it's a super system. You gives a lot of flexibility and some powerful things you can do, but there are also something you need to consider when you do it. As we mentioned, it's used for offloading something that takes a while to execute. It runs under the context of the user who started it, and that's important to know. If it started from an RTC client, it will run with the user context, not security context in NAV from that user. That's something Bardo will talk about. That's used in the job queue. If it's the NAS, it's the NAV user that's combined with the NAS. It takes some time to start up a background session. I would prefer that we look on it as they are like a user that logs on. It's not as costly. It takes around 10 milliseconds if it's fast. But the more session you kick off and the more session or the more loaded your server is, it will take longer and longer time. And the start session call itself is asynchronously. So that is, the okay you get back is that the parameters you specified was okay. The code unit is there and the company and so on. Not that the session itself is started, because that will start sometime later. It might take a really short time. It can take a bit longer before it actually kicks in. The record parameter you give on and gives is actually just a copy. So there's no way of communicating back to the session that actually initiated this background session. You have to communicate using tables. Write something. And then background session has somewhat similar error handling as the NAS. It's not as drastic as the NAS. It does not restart the server process. But if a background session encounters an error, it will stop executing and then log an event log error, and then that's it. Then that session is done. And that makes the background session a bit more tricky. I will show it in a demo later on. We have a corresponding function called stop session, which surprisingly not does stop a session. It actually allows you to stop any session. It's not only one you started as a background session. It could also be an RTC client that's connected. Background session, and if you're lucky and hit a web service call, you can also stop that connection. But in the same way as stop is also asynchronously. That is, when you get the OK back, we have noted that you want it to stop, and we do our best to stop it. And the best way you can think about this is that it stops the same way as the debugger, where you have this break on next AL statement. That's the same way as we stop it. So when you're done executing the AL statement that was when you call stop session, the next thing that will happen is that we stop it. And that means that you, in some cases, can have a session that we may not be able to stop. That is if you, for instance, call out in the outer world using .NET, or you have some kind of SQL statement that will take forever on the SQL server. We are not able to stop those. You have to come back and execute the next AL statement. If you get some of those, you have to restart the server to kill those. We will mark them as being on the way to be stopped. So when they come back, we will stop them. But they can eventually hang on for some time. And one special thing here is we have implemented that the sleep statement is handled differently. It will stop immediately if you are in a sleep statement. So a really good way of doing something that works forever and do something every hour or every day or something is just to put in one sleep statement. It will stop it regardless of how long it is at the time when the stop session actually is executed. That is also something we use in the job queue. I have some pre-prepared small demos on stop session or session and background session, and it's super simple code. How do I get that one back into view? There it is. I implemented a really small demo with 2 buttons on the home page that calls my 2 code units. I have run it, which is super simple. It just starts a background session, which is the next one, which is background session. And here I have some super simple code that will just do something for 3 seconds. That is to make it be a super fast, short demo. We will then start up the RTC client. I added 2 UI elements. One that will run it as a normal one. This is just calling the things that works for 3 seconds, and you can see it's blocked for 3 seconds. I cannot do anything. And then I click the background session and it's done immediately. It looks like, because it's running for 3 seconds in the background. And here's the first thing you need to take care of, is that I can click this many times. And now I actually started up a lot of sessions. I'm not sure if I can be fast enough to show it. I can have it running. There you can see there's a lot of sessions in there. So that's something you need to be aware of in your code, that you do not spin off multiple sessions if you do it as simple as I did. The job queue is a good place to look again, promoting the job queue. One of the things that you will notice is that, if I go in and modify my small unit here and then do a message, messages are ignored, but if you do an error, for instance, and look at the difference. We record normally, you will get the box up when it's done. I'll put it in the end. And if you do it in the background session, you don't get that. It's actually executing and then meeting the error, and then it logs an entry in the event log. You can see the first one here, that this background session with ID 49 for some reason had a message called oops, and then you get the full stack trace, so you can see it's in code unit, whatever. And the same would happen if it's a division by 0 or a deadlock or any of these ugly things that normally will abort and stop the execution. They will all stop and log an event log entry.
You will also see it in the session event table.
Yeah, you can also see it in this session. Another small thing I added, if I go in and modify my super advanced code to make it run for some longer. There's the ability to stop a session, and I added a little function on the session list, which is not there, and there's a reason for why it's not there. This one will actually allow you to stop any session, also your coworkers, if it was on the form, because there's no, you have to be a developer to use it, but there's no security context in that sense who is allowed to execute a stop session. So we don't surface it in the product, we have it in the PowerShell, where you have to be an admin to be able to do these things. But if you add it, as I do, as a simple user, this is what you have to add to be able to stop any session on using the RTC, this piece of line here. You will see I can kick off some background sessions. I go in the session management. You see they are there, background session. If I go into the action, I can actually stop them. I can also stop myself, which is not that nice. I lose the connection to the server and then it's gone. But that's using the stop session. I think that was actually, you have to be careful with the background session. You can, if you have something code that is really heavy, there's a limitation on how many you can. You depend on the hardware on the machine, but you will soon, fast, overload the server if they all are running some kind of heavy computation and you spin off more than 10. Sessions are to be considered wisely, but it's a powerful tool. You can do a lot with. And I think we were switching over to something about the job queue, which Bart will take over.
I will. Yes. Actually, in our first version of this presentation, we didn't have that much about the job queue because we thought everybody has heard enough about that. But we have got so many questions that we chose to squeeze it in anyway. And as Uffe says, we use sessions and NAS and so on to run the job queue and execute things in the background. I would note, however, that we had not as advanced, but some part of this job queue already in version 5, which you could run on a NAS. So, but anyways, this is just a screenshot. I think we'll go to the client itself. So, I will get some light over here. So first of all, if you look at which sessions do I have running right now? Well, I have myself, the client. I have the NAS, and you can see here the NAS has session ID 1. So as soon as the server started, the NAS started, because I didn't follow Uffe's advice. I didn't configure my own NAS. And then I have 2 background sessions that are just lying here. And then my Windows client. And Uffe mentioned the event viewer to see what fails when you start up. And I bet that 90% of you will do the same error as I do. Because if you look here, I configured my NAS to start up CodeUnit 450, which is good. But who starts the NAS? I mean, which user is the NAS? It's network service, right? So, in order to start NAS, you have to, use keyboard. See what? That's a new one. Maybe because I haven't been on the network. Save what? It hasn't done that before. Anyways, the point is you need to create network user as a user on the server before you do this, because otherwise it's like locking your door and forget the key, right? Because you don't get the server up again. Then you need to go to SQL and delete the users from the users table and so on. Or follow Ufe's advice and do a special configuration for the NAS. Or configure a new service tier. Yep. So, let's take a look at the job queue features. Job queue. And you can see that it consists of the job queues, which you may have running. And here you could have several queues running. I have two. But if you go back here, you can see we have something called category, or job queue categories. That is, let's say if you have several queues running, one for email dispatching and one for posting sales orders and one for whatever. And when users send off jobs, you want to direct the job to the correct queue. For instance, all sales and purchase orders you want to direct to one queue, because then they're serialized. And you can enter as many of these as you want. Then we have the job queue entries, and those are the entries we want to have run. So if you want something run or scheduled, you can enter it here. If you you can see we have two here, something for an email queue. And this is, by the way, 5.0 functionality. So, but this has something called recurrence. So you can have it run on certain days and with a certain interval and so forth. And you can specify when you want to start it next time and in which hours and so on. So let's take a very simple example. We want to run some brilliant code we have written. Just put my mouse here. So, just resize here. So when you want to have a code unit defined to be run in job queue, you have to use the onRun trigger, you can use the onRun trigger to specify the job queue entry as a parameter. And then on the sending side or the planning side, you could say you can fill that with parameters and values and what have you, XML documents and so on. So when my job starts, it's handed over this job queue entry. And that has a lot of fields. Well, basically that's the one we filled in before. So let's see, we have this brilliant code where we want to update some customers. I have a different version of it just to make it even more explainable. You set a filter, some customers, and then we iterate through them and update their address with this information. So what I can do is I can go to the job queue, create a new entry. It's not a report, and report meaning batch job. 60,000. You see it picks up the name from job queue. And then the parameter, and we want to limit this to only one customer, or two customers, I don't know. And here is where I can put the job queue category code in if I wanted to. And this is basically it. I can say, okay, you see it's on hold here. And that's because the job queue scans this table while we are editing, right? So, but we don't want it to pick it up while we are entering the data. We want to enter the data and then say we're ready. So I can set status to ready. And then it's just a question of patience, because this table is scanned every 10 seconds or so. Gone. And we could go to the customers. Of course, I should have shown the customers before, because you are suspicious. Ta-da! As expected, right? And if you go to the job queue log entries, job queue log entries, you can see that this code was executed at this point in time. And by the way, you have error messages here. This was from a demo the other day, yesterday, where a sales order had nothing to post. I don't know how we're doing on time and into which depth I should go. Oh yeah, by the way, this is how I do it from the UI. But often you would want to have some code that sends something to the background for you, right? I mean, you have, I don't know, sales order and you want to have that scheduled for you, or you have some process. So the way to do that is pretty much do what we did in the UI just now. Just have a code unit, or a code, could it be a page, where you have the job queue entry, and you tell it that you want to run a code unit, you tell it which code unit, and that's basically it. But then you can say, enter something in the parameter string, and that's just something you want to pass on to the consuming code unit. There are some fields. I mean, you may even add more. It could be that you need some special dates or what have you. Then this field here deserves some comment. Run in user session. So, as I said in the beginning, which user is running the NAS? Well, it's the NT network service. But what if you want to run things as the user who presses the button? How do you do that? Well, it's not really easy. So what we do is that when you press the button, for instance, sales post, when you press that, we, of course, enqueue the job queue entry. But we also, at the same time, spin up sleeping user session in background session. So what happens when the job queue gets to your sales order to post, it will inform your process that now you can go off and post the sales order, because then it happens in your context. And then notify on success. We have, if you go to your home page, we have a notifications window here, which last time gave me an error with the sales order thing. That was nothing to post. But you can ask it to give you a notification anyway, I mean, even in case of success. So if we run this one, this code unit, by the way, this is what you need to supply, these parameters. And then we have a code unit here called enqueue that will take care of the rest of the housekeeping, so to speak. The spinning up that extra session and updating what is necessary. So basically, when cut down to the bare minimum, these two lines are what you need, plus the enqueuing here. Right? So if we run this guy, then By the way, you can see here, that's my job queue part. So you can see here it's ready. You press F5, it's gone, and we have a message here. It succeeded successfully. Yeah, I think that concludes the job queue session or part, unless we have a question from this gentleman.
Question on this this process you have started. If I've entered a number of job queue entries,
Yeah.
once a week, once a month,
Yes.
every single entry has a sleeping code?
No, sorry. Those are different. This is when I do it from code or... Oh, sorry. The question was about these sleeping extra background sessions that wait. And if you have recurring jobs or you enter something directly in the job queue, no, we don't create special sessions for those. It's only when you do it in that way I just showed you, this way, with the enqueuing function here. So recurring sessions will not use that methodology. Yeah.
Am I getting it right that normally those job queue sessions are run on NAS or on server, but with this checkmark they are run on client's machine?
Yes. Absolutely correct. So the question was, actually, where is the posting run in this case? I mean, if you do as Uffe tells you to do, you have a separate NAS session or a NAS process, and the user presses post on the sales order. Then, since the user is on the server, I mean the client server, then the actual posting is also done on that server. But the NAS resides in a different place. Unless you want it to run on the NAS server, but then you need to change a piece of code. I will show you, and I can... Here, this is the corresponding place where we do for the sales order and purchase order, by the way. You can see that run in user session is set to true. But this could actually be either false, or you could even set it to a check mark. I mean, you could, or we could have made a check mark in the sales and receivable setup, which then would be passed to this parameter, right? So if you want to run things on the NAS server, you just write false here.
There's a question up in the back also.
Yeah. Hi, David.
How you doing?
Good, thanks. You?
Really impressed how much you put this up. It's wonderful now. I think a lot of people didn't realize how great the in-user session is. It's just brilliant. But the question
I paid him to say that. Sorry.
I had a question a long time ago, and I just wondered if you can answer it now. Did you do testing to find out how many background sessions you can launch? Remember we were looking at trying to do like 10,000 or so. Is it possible? Or is it?
So the question was, is there a limitation on how many background sessions you can set up? And the corresponding answer is, it depends. It depends on your hardware, on how many cores you have on your machine. There is a limitation in the operating system on how many threads you can set off, and that we have to follow a bit. But we are using a job in a thread pool, so they will just be pooled up. And that's why it may not be kicked off immediately. If you do too many, they will wait until there's a vacant entry. So there's a limitation, yeah. But not in that sense that you can queue up as many as you want, but it may take a long time before the last one is run. I can't remember it in my head right now, what the pool is set up to be. But
I have done tests where I have started 1,000 simple, I mean, just almost dummy code unit just sleeping, you can easily start 1,000. I mean, the server memory will go up a bit. Uffe had a slide that shows that the overhead is approximately, and that's a very rough guess, 20 kilobytes. Kilobytes. That's not a lot. And I did that with 1,000 sessions. I mean, on my laptop. So, as Uffe, what Uffe said is something we are taught to say when we don't know. But basically, I would say yes, 1,000 should be possible. But remember, it takes up Windows threads, it takes up other resources, and it forces the Windows operating system to do context switching. I mean, then you basically have 1,000 jobs you have to attend, see how are you doing today, and go on. So, was that a T-shirt question, or?
Since we couldn't answer correctly, I think so.
Well, we did.
Then there's a question in the front here. Yes, you can specify which server the job queue is running on. That's part of the setup. Bardo will protest if I'm not right, but you set it up when you set up this pool of job queues. Nope, there was one more there. No, how the question was, does background session use license? No, they don't.
We've been hiding that from the sales team, the pricing guys.
And that's a question. Yeah?
Is it the same licensing that you get one NAS license anyway and others additional?
Good question.
It's same. We've been hiding this from the sales guy, the pricing guys. They don't know about this. Don't mention it. No, it's free. It's part of the server. And the reason for you needing several NAS earlier was that you didn't have separate processes. You needed one per company or whatever. You don't need that anymore. So what we do, you can see that in the configuration, when we started NAS, we started CodeUnit 450 up. And what CodeUnit 450 does is that basically just iterates through the companies, and for each company it starts some queues, and for each queue it will go, for each company it will go through the queues and start them up. And technically, the NAS's job is done by then. It actually could just close itself down. But then, occasionally, for whatever reason, a background serving a job queue may fail, for whatever programming error or... So we actually do this for every 10... How was it? 10 minutes, I think we do it. So every 10 minutes we just take around and see, okay, did anyone die in the last 10 minutes? And then wake them up again. Which brings me to another thing.
Yeah, the question was, can you set up as many instances using PowerShell and run as many code units as I want? Yes, you can.
And actually, we deserve a T-shirt for not having discussed this with our licensing people, I would say. What I want to actually forgot to show you before is the job queue itself. I did go into some detail with job queue entry, but if you look at the job queue, it has some parameters as well. So, of course, it has a name, and you can set it up to only handle certain jobs that is handed to it. But you can also say, do we want this to be run on a NAS? Yes or no? So, if it's set to be run automatically from a NAS, then you put a check mark here. And then when the NAS starts up, it will go and see is there anyone who wants to be started up by me? And in this case, yes. Furthermore, it could be that you want it to be started up on a very specific machine. Let's say you have several machines standing, or server or service instances. So you can actually go here and pick a certain machine, and even a special instance on that machine. Yeah. So it's pretty configurable from here. So if you don't take this off, right, then I can actually even stop and start it here, right? Or I can create a new one. Demo. You're up running. This is how difficult it is. Or actually, technically, you're not running, but then you press start and it's running. So, and I'll stop it again and start this one. No, I don't need to.
Maybe you should go back and continue with the
Yeah, I think we had a slideshow actually. Yeah. I know you love PowerPoint. So this is all the setup things, the example I just showed you, how to start up, how to programmatically start it up, and then debugging. So I guess we've seen some debugging sessions here. But if you go to the, this one, yeah, I can, sorry. It was the users I couldn't see for some reason. And I'm trying to access a very dangerous component that we don't know of. So, let's say I want to debug code unit 80. I mean, debug the posting of a sales order, right? Oh, by the way, let's take the NAS itself. As Uffe told you, you can debug a background session. Debug. And since it hasn't encountered an error, but then you can press break. Now, the process sleeps for 10 seconds, and then it looks, is there anything to do? No, then it goes back to sleep. So approximately 10 seconds after, it will get here. So now, here we have a very elaborate way of calculating how long we want to sleep. And that's because in some previous versions, Uffe, the stop session wouldn't work if you were sleeping too long. So if you were sleeping, for instance, for a minute or so, then Uffe didn't have the time to wait, so he would just, I don't know, crash or something. So anyway, this is another way of writing, I will wait for 10 seconds.
That's not necessary anymore. You can wait for hours and you will still stop it when you stop the server or the session.
Yeah, Uffe will kill you. So anyway, this is the debugger. And then from here, of course, I can continue and I can even stop. But let's stop that one. Now, let's say we want to debug code unit 80 when we get to it. And remember, that will be started up in a session that you can't see here because it's not there yet. So we want to go into code unit 80. And I don't know, let's say we just want to stop there, right? And we have the debugger, and we see, no, let's just go to the sales orders first. Sales orders. And we go to our debugger. Sorry. That was not what I wanted. Debug next session. And this is, by the way, also how you would debug web service calls, right? Because you can't debug something that's not there. So you hide behind the bush and then you attack when it's there. So if I post now, a background session will be started up. Right, this is me waiting for the job queue to allow me to post. Maybe I should go and check that the job queues actually are running, because sales post is, okay, sorry, that's the one we did not start again. Yep, right, so broke there, or it's called broke when it's debugger in past tense. It stopped. And then of course you do your regular debugging inside here, right? Step over and step into, and if you're an old nav guy, you would love this step out, right? Sometimes you are in some deep code and then you say, okay, I've seen enough, I just want to get out again. So we have a step out. And also another good thing is, let's say you know, blah, 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 you debug and say, I found the bug. So instead of having it to continue, so you have to recreate the sales order or whatever you're working on, you just press stop, because then that will, well, basically just error. That's similar to issuing an error. So the user, which in this case is job queue, will see this as an error. So hopefully we'll have an error report here. And that is because, what did I not? Okay, maybe I sorry, patience. So I got an error, and the error message is that the debug stopped the current activity, as expected. And you can see we get these notifications. And Uffe just reminds me that we are busy here. So I will rush away with the next one. Did I have this? It did not. This is the last session, by the way, so OData, very quick. Did everybody here see the presentation earlier today about OData queries? No? No. Good. Not enough of you said yes. So let's say we have a query, and I won't go through making it, but we have an advanced query here. I can run it to show you the result. So, yeah, this is just about the query. I won't go into details here. Result. So we can expose this as a web service, or rather, both as a web service, but also as an OData source. So if I go to the web services window here, you can see that I have exposed my customer list, my purchase orders, and this query I just showed you as web service, or sorry, as OData. I won't demo this right now because we are in time trouble, but you can drag this into Excel and use Power Pivot, and the newest Excel 2013 has it natively built in, so very nice, and you can set up user permissions and all kinds of stuff on the newest Excel. Filtering and well, this is the result, by the way, but I won't show you how to because time.
It's a great way to get data out of NAV, and especially a large data set. It's paged, so you do not get all 1 million rows in one go. You get it a page at a time.
Text. Actually, we did show it. I showed it on screen while some other people were talking. So you have to multitask. So you see here, these are my OData services, and if I very quick and write one of these, like customers, for instance, customers, and then I get a very special format, but this XML document contains all the customer data. And as I said, it's a very specific format that a lot of products and increasingly number of products are supporting. So as Uffe said, it is a great way of consuming data for reporting and what have you. The reason we're hurrying is Unicode, because there's some good things about Unicode, and from a technical standpoint, what happens on the SQL Server is that we use nvarchar instead of varchar. And the difference is that we support Unicode, obviously. I mean, I don't know if you can see it here. This does, apologies if I'm offending anyone, because I just copied some characters from a character map, just to show that you can take some, whatever, Greek and Thai or whatever it is, and some Russian and other things. I did also choose first some characters from that looked Arabic, but then you never know what they mean, so I took them out again. But basically, you can do stuff like this, right? And it also works with web service and OData. If you go to SQL forums, there's a question here that has to be really, it's a really quick question.
There's no need for length in text characters. Does mean there's no restriction that we...
So the answer, the question is, one good thing we have now is that in AL code you can declare variables without, text variables without length. So they're basically just .NET strings of infinite length or whatever your memory is. But no, in the database you're still confined to the 250 characters. Was that a good question, Uffe?
Yep.
We have to get rid of these T-shirts.
Mm-hmm.
So performance is, well, here I wrote in the good, but there's also a bad side of this. The thing about using native strings is that we don't have to do this typecasting and internal conversion. Everything is just .NET strings and so on. So that gives us an execution advantage. Upgrade is automatic in the sense that you open an old database and it's upgraded, or you restore one, it's upgraded. But it takes a long time. I mean, if it's a big database, it will take a couple of hours or 3 hours, where it just stands and upgrades the tables. And by the way, that's fast. That's because we told the server team that what they originally came with was not acceptable. Database space is increased because we have a lot of strings and code fields and so on. So, I don't know, 70 to 80% extra. Go to the computer store and buy an extra disk or something. And then performance. I mean, on SQL there is a theoretical performance overhead using Unicode, but that's probably balanced or outbalanced with our internal performance. And if you go to the SQL forums out there, I mean, there is a religious debate about whether you should or should not use Unicode. So, but we chose to keep things simple. I mean, string is Unicode, period. Now, there's also an ugly part to this. We have a file thing, and we can't be sure that files we get or we have to give to other people are Unicode, right? I mean, banks or files you get from banks or authorities or whatever. So, out of fear of breaking things, we kept the file API as is. Also because we use it ourselves in our export-import. So if you have Unicode, by the way, XML ports and so on, that still works with Unicode. But no, this is specific to the file object and stream object, by the way. So you can either do as I did here, create a .NET stream writer, and this is one of the nice things about 2009 that you can write .NET or use .NET types, or you can go a step further and actually create a system byte array from this string. And of course I have tried this out. So go to code unit, whatever number that was, 999. So we get a certain customer. This was the one with Thai, the Russian, whatever, second name. And you can see I can try to either just write him to a file, or rather I take the address and address 2, I write them to a file. Or I can do it through a stream writer, or I can do this byte array way of doing, which is very cumbersome. You take the string, put it into singular bytes, and then you write one byte at a time. So what's the results from those? And I know that you're waiting in suspense here. So we take the direct, right? This is the normal one. And almost as expected, right? From NAV, that simple writing, that will just give some garbage there where you had your strange stuff. Now if you go to the this one, this looks correct, right? The correct first address and then this weirdy second address. And if you take the byte, same. So they're equally good, you think. So if you look at the size of this file, this is why this is on the really ugly page, right? It says 48 bytes there, right? 48. And if you look here, it says 45, not 48. So what's the difference? So if you open this one with a hex editor, and you open the other, and whoever wrote that hex editor, thank you. So if you look at these, you can see this says Rheinstraße and so on, and some whatever. The second one has some 3 weird characters that maybe some .NET expert knows why it gets there. So anyway, if you really want to be very precise with your full control of what you write into that file, then it's the byte array way. And actually we should actually mention one thing that I didn't put a slide on, because I did mention the XML port. The XML, well, data port is gone. So what about flat files, right? So now the XML port also handles flat files. And hence a good question, why is then called the XML port? So anyways, just kidding. Questions?
Yeah. Can you repeat the question?
Two users created background sessions at the same specific time. Will the sessions be processed side by side or in a row?
They get a thread. So the question is, if 2 users spin off a background session, they will usually execute at the same time. They are like a thread.
They are parallel. I mean, same if you do 100.
Yeah.
In our development environment, we created several instances of the NST on the same ports, just using TCP port sharing. I had seen I can enable it still. So if I create new instances, do I get any performance issues? Are there any other things that I shouldn't use it? So because otherwise I could always create.
So the question is, why don't you use port sharing anymore? Yeah. And you use it? Yeah. You can use it. We allow it, and we We also use it and let it work, but there's some issues with it. You can run into issues with debugging or firewalls and all that. That makes it more difficult if you use port sharing. So if we do not turn it on by default, it is a decision you as an administrator on your server has to take yourself. But, fine. It's up to you, but we do not recommend it.
We have a question here.
Hi there. User-level security for viewing data obviously still works in the application, but as you now have a single account going from the NST to the SQL database, how does this work?
So the question was that security that used to be taken care of by the SQL server is now taken care of the NST, the Navision server. We do handle that. We do respect security filters and permissions. So we handle that. And that's also why one of the reasons for removing Seafront, because that one got directly in. All our interfaces we respect security filters and permissions, web service, OData, background sessions, RTC sessions.
We had one up there. So the question is whether we have this ANSI ASCII issues with Unicode, and the answer is no, that should all be gone. But as I just showed you with files and so on, that just gives you a new set of issues. But that part should be gone. You can, in the same database, have all kinds of languages. This is one here. Oh, sorry.
Did you create a new function to convert between Unicode and not Unicode variables? And can you create not Unicode text variables now?
So you're on mic. No, we chose that we go clean Unicode all over. So everything, I mean, the old text string and code is now Unicode. We did consider creating a new type, an OEM type or whatever. We chose not to. We wanted to keep it simple, because this is only an issue for file exchange and so on.
So we have a time left for a couple of questions when the next one is ready.
A question about the job queue, and if you would run it, I guess, in the NAS instead of in the user context. If you would do that, you would lose any security filters. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. Well, in the sense that you can set security filters up for the NAS user. But I mean,
yes.
That's the point. So
but if you had set up for different users, you would lose them,
of course,
because they would use the same security filters once
exactly.
they posted them.
Exactly. So you have to choose whether it runs as that user, and then it happens on the same server as that user was sitting, or it runs as NAS.
Okay, thank you.
2 questions left, I think. We will be available in the lab and afterwards.
A quick question about server-side COM. Has that changed since the beta version? Since in beta it was kind of possible, but it was trying to create some user interface and dying at that point, or am I missing something?
So I'm not sure if you understand the question. You said since the beta, there hasn't been a server-side COM in the betas. It's been removed, and it will not work on the server. Okay. It only works on the client side. And there was one over there. That will be the last one. The question is if the management console will be backward compatible, and it will not. It will show the instances, but you will not be able to do anything but start and stop them. So you can only add new ones, and you have to have installed a version of the NAV server before you can add. That might change in the future. But currently you have to install one first, and then you can add instances, and it's only a 2013.
In the management tool, There is the management services port. What is it used for?
Oh, that's used for the PowerShell. So when you are executing PowerShell commands that requires, for instance, the list of active users or setting up user permissions, that port is used for the PowerShell. So it does not reuse any of the other connections, it has its own connection.